hymn festival led by Walden Moore in March. And we celebrated it in concert, played by Todd Wilson in May. Today, we get an up-close look at the renovation process itself with the help of a key figure in the process, Jonathan Ambrosino, the tonal finisher of the instrument. Jonathan has been working, yes, indeed. Jonathan has been working with Calvary on this instrument since 2001, when he was invited to evaluate the instrument and dream up the plan for its restoration. His knowledge of the instruments built by Aeolian-Skinner in the first half of the 20th century is unparalleled.
Blah, blah, blah. Oh, is this on? I'm sorry.
And if you ask, get this, if you ask, because I'm terrified of writing introductions, especially for somebody so great as Jonathan, but if you ask OpenAI on Google to write an introduction for you, it says that he is known for his meticulous work in the tonal finishing and restoration of historic organs, including the 1935 Aeolian-Skinner at Calvary Church in Memphis.
So much for AI. We need to buy stock in whatever makes that happen.
However, it fails to mention his infectious joy, his insatiable curiosity, his ease in making friends and turning a felicitous phrase, and his deep care for not only this instrument, but also this church and its people. He has flown in from Boston to be with us today, and it's just wonderful to have him talk about this incredible project. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Ambrosino.
Good morning. Thank you. This morning's presentation has a few different components, the first of which is, I wonder how many of you actually know how this thing works. So we're going to do a tiny bit of Organ 101 to start. First of all, if you don't draw anything, nothing plays. Do you see this? I'm not trying to make modern music. I'm just trying to demonstrate what happens. In order to make a sound, one has to pull a stop. And if you look closely at the console, you'll notice that the stops are ordered in these groupings with labels. And each one of those labels refers to one of the 4 keyboards. I say 4 because there are 3 for the hands, but you'll know that, of course, from watching Kristen and Jackson play, that there's 1 for the feet. So the stops over here operate from this group. In this group, we have stops over on the right. In this group, we go back over to the left. And in the final group is the farthest on the right. You'll want to know also that these buttons change the knobs. Can you see the knobs move? It's how the organists are able to make rapid changes of sound. So that simply, if this hand isn't free, but this one is, just using my thumb and holding a chord, I can make all of that sound change, thanks to the wizardry of solenoids moving the stop knobs and a computer memory device here inside the console. Does this still work? Yes, it does. That's excellent. The final thing that you want to know, but this requires some really clever looking on your part. If you look over here, can you see there's a subtle moving of wooden louvers? They're horizontal, and they look like Venetian blinds. So what does that do? Well, a pipe only speaks at a single volume. That's all you get. That pipe can only do that one thing at that one pitch, one timbre, one output. So everything on the right-hand side of the organ is placed in these boxes so that the sound can be made louder and softer. I'll start with the shutters closed. Rather quiet, eh? And then it gets louder. If I add another stop, like that. Some of the most dramatic sounds in the organ are in the box a little to the left. And part of that drama is the ability to make the sound grow and diminish, or even better, get very, very quiet. Because God does not roar, he whispers. So that's a little bit about the instrument. If you have any other questions, once we're getting this reorganized, you can always ask them either after this presentation or, frankly, after service. I'll be here all day. Let's see. The history of this organ is as complicated as the history of this church, but we'll just do a little capsule of it. And the most important thing to know is the man that you see, an Englishman, G. Donald Harrison, born in London in 1889. He was the son of a lawyer and trained in that, but also was fascinated with how things work. In World War I, he was an airplane mechanic, and like many of us who were fascinated by all things mechanical, took apart engines and put them back together to learn more about how they worked. But he was always fascinated by music and sound, and so eventually bucked his father and went to work for this man, Henry Willis III. What you need to know about the Willis family is that they built all of the major cathedral organs in England during the 19th century, particularly after 1870. St. Paul's Cathedral, Gloucester, and most importantly, Durham, where the choir was this past summer. The core of that organ is a Willis organ from 1876. At this time, in 19-teens, which is when Mr. Harrison went to work for Willis, the most important American organ builder was in Boston, Ernest Skinner. He's pictured here, well, he should be, on the left at the age of 65. Or 60, I should say. He was very famous, but he was getting a little bored with his organs, and he decided it was time to go hear some new work in England and become inspired. So he met with Mr. Harrison's boss, the younger Willis on the right. And Mr. Willis came over to America to try to teach the Skinner Organ Company how to make the organs more vivacious sounding and clearer, more dramatic. Well, that didn't really work. So eventually, Willis suggested that Mr. Harrison, his protege, emigrate to America and work alongside Mr. Skinner. They did so in this building. This is in Dorchester, Mass., a large factory that employed about 140 people. During the Roaring 20s, the Skinner Organ Company also had a second plant in western Massachusetts that employed another 45. At this time, they were building between 50 and 60 pipe organs a year. This is the Roaring 20s that really were roaring in the organ business. Mr. Harrison's arrival caused a real change in the sound, and it coincided with incredibly prestigious contracts for the Skinner Organ Company. This is the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, a very large concert organ in Hill Auditorium. This is the University of Chicago, Rockefeller Chapel of 1928, an extremely impressive building, thanks to a gift from John D. Rockefeller Sr. This is Princeton University Chapel, the masterpiece of the architect Ralph Adams Cram, also 1928, very impressive organ and very impressive building. And finally, the one of these four organs that survives at Yale University's Woolsey Hall, completed in 1929. People really noticed a sound, the change in sound of these organs. They were, as I said, more vivacious, more dramatic, more compelling. But they still had all of the beautiful, quieter, and orchestral lush effects that Skinner organs had been known for. But the people who were buying organs knew who was responsible for the change in the sound, and that was Mr. Harrison. Eventually, the two parted ways. The management of the company favored Mr. Harrison, seeing that in his vision for a brighter, more serious organ, that he was going to be the commercial and artistic success of the future. And he took the organists with him. He really got great clients. And soon, customers were asking specifically that he take care of the tonal and artistic end of the organs. These began in organs in New York City. This is Grace Cathedral, San Francisco, an organ finished in 1934. The next year, the Groton School which has educated Franklin Delano Roosevelt and a lot of the other leading class of that era. This is from 1935. Next year, Church of the Advent in Boston, in which the sort of a birthplace of the Anglo-Catholic wing of the Episcopal Church. His fame soared, and after the war, they couldn't keep up with the demand, both in smaller places and famous places. Perhaps none more famous than the Mormon Tabernacle, an organ incredibly well known to Mormons and non-Mormons because of the weekly Sunday broadcast, music, and the spoken word. Here's a picture of a now 60-year-old G. Donald Harrison, a little more wizened from all this organ building, by the console of that organ. Next year, this is Boston Symphony Hall. This organ in the Riverside Church, another Rockefeller church of his generation from 1930. This organ was made deeply famous by the concertizing of Virgil Fox, who with E. Power Biggs was the mid-20th century's most important and certainly visible concert organists. And finally, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, finished in 1954, an organ that just captivated the public with particularly this blazing trumpet stop, horizontal pipes located 500 feet from the main organ. It wasn't just the organists who were interested in getting to know Mr. Harrison and learning more about his work and getting his work. This is Albert Schweitzer, who was, in addition to his humanitarian work, a great scholar of the work of Bach and a great amateur organist. He came to visit the Aeolian-Skinner factory in 1949, and he's holding in his hands a pipe from the Boston Symphony organ. Here's E. Power Biggs in the middle, another kind of wizened Mr. Harrison, about to have a heart attack, we now know, on the top. He was no stranger to the bourbon bottle. And then in the bottom is Charles Munch, the French conductor, who at the time was the conductor of the Boston Symphony. So what does all of this have to do with Calvary Church, Memphis? Well, this enormous rise in the artistic style of Harrison, this brighter, clearer, more serious organ, particularly not just for accompanying choirs and leading hymns, but to a more serious organ for the rendition of the organ of music specifically written for the pipe organ. Because in this era of the 20s and 30s, it was more common to hear music on the organ not specifically written for the organ itself, but transcribed from other mediums, mostly the orchestra, sometimes piano and vocal music. In this era, Mr. Harrison and organists alike were interested to get back to the roots of an instrument that could play music written specifically for it. Their lodestar in all of this was the music of Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. And this organ in Memphis, Tennessee, was one in this series of instruments in which Mr. Harrison began to work out this new style of his, which would eventually be called the American classic organ, an organ that could honor all the good things in American organ building that had come before, but forge a new path, melding into an eclectic instrument that could play pretty plausibly most music. What you see before you is the organ's original configuration, when it was all one unit over here. In 1953, that changed to the current configuration, and it seems a little silly for you to see a picture on the screen of something that's already in front of you. Sorry, this is what happens when you're in Boston and not back in Memphis. But at that time, I believe that was a sacristy before, but there was a desire to reorient the chancel more in the manner of most Episcopal churches, with a divided choir, the choir facing each other, and an equal amount of space, north and south. This had positive and negative aspects in a way, because what it did was put the parts of the organ that really lead the singing a little further away from the people the organ is meant to lead. So if you can imagine all of that sound, one bay closer to you, the people, over here, it probably would have been a little clearer and not needing to work so hard. On the other hand, one of the organ's really dramatic sounds, that being these fiery trumpet stops, they would have had quite a bit more pipes to filter through. And I have a feeling that that's even more dramatic in 1953 than it was in 1935, without their having to really change anything. They were simply removing a lot of blockage. So the sound of the organ changed not for the change of any kind of pipe, but simply because of the architectural reconfiguration. The next big change to the organ sound was not necessarily because it sounded poor, but because tastes in these things evolve, just as they do in architecture, car design, what we put in our stomachs. If you can imagine all of the Victorian homes in 1960 that were thought terribly out of date and suddenly had drop ceilings or stencil patterns painted out by green paint. This organ received a kind of updating like that to make it yet more brilliant, yet more fiery and exciting. This work was done very professionally by a company in Lawrence, Kansas, the Reuter Organ Company, in which a number of the pipes, really most of the pipes remained. Several of them were altered and some discarded altogether. This work was finished by the end of 1983 when Dr. John Hooker was the director of music here. By 2000, that artistic reprofiling of the organ itself was out of date, and people began to rediscover the beauty of Mr. Harrison's earlier work from the 1930s. And that's when I enter the picture, when I was invited to survey the organ and see what it needed mechanically and where it might go artistically in Holy Week of 2001. Sadly, just a few days shy of experiencing Waffle Shop, which was a pleasure deferred until we started doing the work in a few years. What I found was an organ hardly neglected, because Calgary doesn't neglect what it owns, but inside, perhaps not the best standard of care. This is the mess of wiring that was in the console. I opened up the wind chests. Every pipe has one of these leather discs underneath it. When it drops in a box charged with pressurized air, the wind rushes by that now extremely black leather valve, almost looks like it's been smoking, to let the wind go up into the pipe. This leather was on its last legs. I found ashtrays in the organ. And cigarette butts. But the most alarming thing was this. This is one of the 4 posts that hold up about 1,500 pipes on that size of the organ. And it had been eaten right through with termites, or by termites. So it looked like this matzah cracker, basically, it was pretty frightening. Fast thinking on the part of the church and their termite people produced a settlement from the termite people who had mitigated termite damage in that area, but clearly hadn't done enough of the work. And that not immense amount of money allowed for a conservative rebuilding of that entire side of the instrument that was carried out in 2002 and 2003. And by entire, I mean the whole chamber got emptied. There's a bad picture I have from inside the chamber in which the decorative grills have been removed and there's nothing left on the inside. This work was done by a colleague of long standing, Joseph Rotella, and his company, the Spencer Organ Company. Joseph and I trained under the same man in Boston, a pioneer of the restoration of the work of this company, Aeolian-Skinner. A man named Nelson Barden, who's now 91 and a little nuts, but very proud of his protégés, which is a very sweet thing. Joseph, this is, has, at least in his days before computer-aided design, did what the people in the Aeolian-Skinner engineering department did. He relayed out this side of the organ to be better for accessibility. It's easier for us now to climb through it and to tune it and to reach its various mechanisms should they go wrong. How did he do this? Well, he got out his craft paper and scissors, measured every component, and simply placed it on that blue thing. And now what was a mess is really gorgeous inside, and it's beautiful 24 years later. He did such good work. It's really, and it's silent. It doesn't hiss wind or anything. And I and my team did as much tonal restoration as we could given the budget available. And it was good, but it left me deeply yearning at some point in the future to come back and do the whole rest of the organ and try to put it as closely back to 1935 as possible. Why? Well, I don't think it's just a historical imperative. I think it sounds better. I think it's better for the leading, not only of the people in the pews, but absolutely for the people in the choir stalls. The organ sound had become so aggressive that it was hard to lead choirs without their feeling competed against rather than subtly led from underneath. And of course, we needed to come back for more waffle shop. I mean, you can't get tomato aspic in Boston. How were we guided in this? I mean, more than half of the number of pipes in this organ had been changed. Well, we're very fortunate that all the factory records of this job survive. What you're seeing now is a listing of all the stops, the various Greek numbers that define how the pipes are made and what strengths they were set at. It also tells us that date of July 10, 1935. This organ was built in an astonishingly short amount of time. The contract was signed on the 28th of February of 1935. The organ was installed in that August because they still had a crew of 100 men and women in this shop, where the factory had built in the heyday of the teens and 20s about 50 or 60 organs a year. In the Depression, they made sometimes 9 organs a year. So they were able to work not only at great speed, but still with a very high level of quality. That level of quality is why we restore these organs. There's something to restore. Just like this building, there's something that will perpetuate, and there's no reason to replace it. It's excellent and just needs to be well cared for. We also had the original engineering drawings, not that we really needed them, but it's always nice. You never know what details happen. So in May of 2023, we came, Joseph and I, Joseph ready to pull parts of that organ that hadn't been done, really pipes, out for restoration, and all of that side that hadn't seen work since 1983. Of course, I think you all know what happened next, and I don't know that I have to rehearse that, but we'll see a couple of pictures. That fall, I got to working on the elements of this side of the organ that budget hadn't allowed us to do everything that we wanted to back in 2002 and 2003. And this was extremely high-tech work. We took over your old flower room, built a pipe washing sink, that's that blue thing over there, and we just washed the pipes, because washing organ pipes is like washing the dishes. You get a degreasing detergent, you scrub them, you're very careful not to disturb the part of the pipe that's making the sound, because you don't want to give yourself extra business. But my associate Peter Rudowitz and I spent a very pleasant week here doing all of this, and then getting the pipes on that side of the organ sounding really good. Better, I think, than I was able to get them in 2003. I'm very pleased with this. Now, it's hard to see, but this stop, it's this set of pipes that sounds like this. This lovely, singing, silvery sound. If you look closely, the pipes, this was one of the stops that got a lot of damage in the truck theft. If you look over on the left, you see the pipes have enormous dents in them, where probably the heel of a boot fell. The worst of them is this guy, which of course makes no sound because there's basically no pipe left. So what you see here, this is not my workshop. It's the workshop of a colleague in Pine Hill, New York, in the beautiful Catskill part of the Hudson Valley. This is a Polish pipe maker who came here in the 1970s to work for a terrible organ company on Long Island, and I think he realized that in about 3 or 4 months. So he and his wife built this home in the Hudson Valley. Part of the great joy of this trip was regular visits to both collect pipes and give him more pipes, just because it's so beautiful if you know that part of the world. He rebuilt every pipe that was damaged so that it could be voiced afresh and fit back into this conjecture of what we hope what we think the 1935 organ sounded like. I only work on a certain kind of pipe, that being those that operate like whistles. These pipes there are different. They're built, they do actually have a moving part, a small vibrating brass tongue called a reed. And in this, they resemble certain of the woodwinds in the orchestra, like an oboe or a clarinet or a bassoon. And that vibrating tongue you can sometimes hear. There's a big brass thing going like that. They're the loudest stops on the organ because they can develop a great power. And this is the... You're not going to get that kind of sound out of the other type, the whistle or flue variety. For the restoration of these pipes, we turn to a very trusted colleague in Granby, Connecticut, near Hartford, Christopher Broom, who himself is the son of a very storied voicer of reed pipes, a man named David Broom, who grew up in the Midlands in England, much like G. Donald Harrison is from England. And he passed his great talent on to his son, Chris, and we've worked with Chris on, well, dozens of these stops for the last 20 years. He was the obvious person, of course, to turn to, not merely for the restoration of stops that had not been stepped on, but absolutely for those that had. And I wish I had a before picture of this stop. What you see here is the oboe in the swell. Which had been made much louder in the Reuter work, and he, thanks to his skill and understanding of how these stops are meant to sound, reclaimed the original tone, but only first by rebuilding the stops to look exactly as they should. Back in my department, here's a very subtle thing, but it has a big impact on the tone. If you can look carefully, what you're seeing is a flue pipe, just a normal pipe like if you peer inside, you'll see. The black thing we call a roller. Some pipes are pushed so hard that, like an orchestral flute, they overblow to an octave above. It's just the nature of a column of air along producing a tone. If it's really pushed, it will jump up a harmonic. The curious thing about this black roller, we call it, is the Bernoulli effect. It actually takes the wind stream back outside of the column of the pipe and stabilizes it to the pitch it should be. And in so doing, creates a very edgy kind of tone. Here, this stop is so fitted, that has much more rosin than its diapason counterpart. This also are fitted so, and they have this sound. That was an important part of many of the stops in this organ that I was very keen to recover. But another, again, very low-tech aspect of what makes that tone is a serration along that slit in the metal through which the air actually comes and begins the vibration aspect that sets the pipe into a tonal production state. So a lot of what the Reuter folks had done is either eliminate all of that serration or introduce a new piece of metal so that they could start afresh with none at all. I wanted to get that velvety sound back. So I went to this organ's sister at Trinity Church, New Haven. You may remember from when Walden Moore was here, he plays for 40 years, played Opus 927. And here is a pipe from that organ with its very fine serration on a pipe otherwise built identically to the one that I just played for you. So not only were we lucky to have factory documentation, I was able to go study an organ that contains almost every single set of pipes that this one does, and none of those pipes has ever been changed. So it's a very specific sort of nerd project for me, I'll grant you, but with I hope, a higher end. So we, with some colleagues, organ builder colleagues of mine who are also interested in the sound of that particular organ, we studied and measured all of these pipes. We counted how many of these nicks, we call them, that make up that serration. We measured the height of that open area, which changes as the pipes go from large to small. We took all of these photographs. And thanks to that documentation and a lot of other experimentation, I was able to get a lot of these sounds back. Some of the stops were lost forever, thrown away in the 1983 work. So when we finally were all organized in the shop, we got all of the original pipes looking really beautiful again. As you can see from this one, I'll play you that pipe. It's this one of the quietest pipes in the whole organ. But every original pipe has the serial number of the organ on it, 932, swell, the division, flute celeste, the stop name, and C, the note name. Here, another one, this is this pipe. It's called roar flute. Roar is the German word for chimney. And you can see the chimney just on top of that canister. This is a pipe that's actually stopped. It doesn't have otherwise an opening on the top, which creates a more fluty type of tone. But when you introduce a tiny little bit of an opening via that chimney, it gets a certain color, as opposed to one that has no chimney. Oh, God. That's a little darker, and that's a little brighter. That's what the chimney is doing. Finally, our great colleague in the beautiful Catskill Mountains made hundreds of new pipes patterned on those from the New Haven organ. And here they are. You can just see hundreds of small pipes. And we set samples here in Memphis so we could be guided to the power and tone we wanted. And then we took them back to the shop and worked on them. This is my workshop, which is a mess. I have my computer open in order to have access to all the data. I have, in fact, this pipe is lying down, ready to be prepared for voicing. The gentleman on the left, Dan Kingman, used to work with Mr. Broom's father at the Austin Organ Company in Hartford. He did a little help for me because he makes beautiful slots in pipes. And the other, Fred MacArthur, is someone, a dean of Boston organists, who I turned pages for on a Brahms Requiem and as 11 years old. And I once turned too quickly, and I've never seen a hand reach up more quickly to bash the page back, and I've been terrorized by him, and have ever since. But I like to think that the sound of the organ that you hear now, which is not obviously an original 1935 organ, it has all of these new pipes, these replicated pipes. It has some pipes from the Reuter organ. It's maybe a bit of a mishmash, but it's been very guided by the notion that it should sound as close as I know to make it back to something that this man would show up in this church and recognize. And apart even from that historical aspect, it should be a practical working musical instrument for the people of this church, not in 1935 and not in 1975 or 83, but in 2025, because you're not a museum, you're a live and living church. On that score, I'll close, and you feel free to ask questions after this. I can't put this in writing. Usually we write articles that memorialize these projects. I have worked for a ton of churches, small village churches, some of the most prominent. As a consultant, I've been privileged to work for St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, Washington Cathedral. I'm going to work at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco in January. These are all lovely places. I hope you understand what a special church you have here in Calvary. We've never been welcomed at another church like we have, like at Calvary. The number of times I've worked in a church and the rector does not know my name, which is fine. I'm a tradesman. I expect to be treated like the plumber. That is not the Calvary way. And it is not just about the food, although the food is wonderful, let me please assure you. But there's a richness of engagement. I know all of the staff here. They know me all by name. That is a rare and beautiful thing. It's the privilege of working for you people and this place is really the gift of a lifetime and a career. So I thank you for that. Thank you very much. So, oh, the dirty secret. Thank you for asking. Every sound in the organ is made by a pipe, except there are a few that, yes? Oh, sure. Yeah.
For the people online, I asked about the electronic parts of the organ that are not actual pipes, and Jonathan, that's what Jonathan's comment was about.
I feel like you're asking if I'm wearing a wig. So almost every sound is made by pipes, but a sound the organ never had, because there was never any room for pipes this large, is a deep bass register that's generated by digital technology and a loudspeaker. Why do we want that sound? Because it's a very emotional effect. If you end an anthem on a lovely thing like this, how much more moving is it when it has that? It's made even more moving that the loudspeaker is in one of those swell boxes, so I can make it louder and softer. Bigger, quieter. And therefore, as the sound fades away, so does the bass. Sadly, that is not the only dreadful sin of electronics. There are some percussion stops. What is that? That is a digital approximation of a celesta. If you've ever heard the Tchaikovsky Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, you know this sound. It was a device invented in 1892. I think when Tchaikovsky used it, it was a brand new instrument. There was such an actual percussion instrument in the organ, but it was bulky, and as there were a few desired pipe additions that seemed a better use of the space. And because the digital reproduction is pretty good, we bit our tongues and did that. Similarly, many organs in this period had a set of tubular chimes, like your grandmother's doorbell, only louder and more of them. And that set of chimes is probably in Joseph Rotella's storage unit right now, and these are also digitally reproduced. Why do we think this is acceptable? Well, we don't, but, but by doing that, we were able to do some other things that were desirable, shall I say. Who else has a question?
Over here.
Hi.
In the picture before the tomato aspic, you were showing, I think, over there, pipes. And snaking around was a metal pipe that looked like plumbing or something.
That's right.
What was that?
So that's not anything that makes sound. These are the ductworks that, like the HVAC system in a building, is actually conveying the pressurized wind. So there's a big turbine blower in the basement that's like a gigantic vacuum cleaner going backwards, well, for forwards for us, but pressurizing the air. That feeds into some bellows close by that regulate the wind initially. And then all you need to do is peer through that grill, and you'll see that there's a whole system of bellows. I think the organ has a dozen all towards, because the various section of pipes speak on very finely regulated differences in wind pressure. But that wind has to be conveyed to the various boxes on which the organ pipes sit, and that's what those are. We call them wind trunks.
You told us how G. Donald Harrison learned to do what he does. How did you learn to do what you do?
Oh, Lord, how long of an answer do you want? I come from an interesting family. My mother and father were both involved in public media, and they met at WGBH in Boston. And my mother, before she became a lawyer, had a life of determination and advocacy to make children's television something in which children weren't sold products. So one of the things that she was a founder of Action for Children's Television, for women in the suburbs of Boston, actively campaigning to have less Captain Kangaroo and more Sesame Street. So when she came home in 1975 to find that her children and child was watching Captain Kangaroo and not her friend Fred Rogers' television show, she said, "You need to do something else." And so she got me involved in a community group of singing, a choral group for elementary kids. I grew up in a suburb with 26 elementary schools, and so this was drawn from all of them. And when that ran out at the end of 5th grade, she said, "Well, you're not going to watch any more television." And she found me 2 choirs of men and boys, one at the Catholic Church in the shadow of Harvard Yard, and the other at the Episcopal Cathedral in downtown Boston. And my father, an extremely lapsed Catholic from Brooklyn, New York, said, "Well, he's not going to St. Paul's in Cambridge." So I joined the choir of men and boys at the Episcopal Cathedral of St. Paul in downtown Boston, which at the time was headed by a man who would become one of the most influential organists of his generation, Thomas Murray, who for 39 years was the university organist at Yale University, playing on the Wolsey Hall organ, a picture of which you just saw. And that cathedral had a new organ in the chancel for the accompaniment of the voices, but in the gallery, it had Aeolian-Skinner Opus 1207. It's a really ugly organ, hence no picture of it on this slide deck, but it was influential. And it was influential in how beautifully he played this organ. He just made such compelling music. And then he said, "Well, you should go over to Trinity Church in Boston." And that's when I got my hand swatted out by the other organist you saw. But I was just captivated by this from a child. So in my 15th year, my 15th summer, instead of working in my grandfather's grocery store in upstate New York, I went to work for Nelson Barton. And here we are.
How has our console changed since it was new? I mean, like, did it originally have all these solenoids in it that moved several stops at once?
Well, the dirty secret is it isn't the original console.
Oh.
This organ has had 3 consoles. In 1935, Aeolian-Skinner was at the tail end of a kind of an experimental mechanism within the console that did all of this recollection of the stops. Instead of a computer memory, it was this huge internal electromechanical memory inside. And it didn't work very well. They only made it about 5 years, and then they went to a different system. It did. It was one of the very last to have that prior generation. So Dr. Studerman stuck with it until 1971 when he purchased a new console, or the church purchased a new console from the last year of Aeolian-Skinner's business. When I came to see the organ first, both in 1992 as a researcher and then again in 2001 as a consultant, that was the console that was here. The second console was built in 1971. It was very plain, and it had solenoids and an extremely early form of solid-state combination memory. I mean, this is well before we all had personal computers, let alone laptops and smartphones. In Sumner Jenkins' leadership, this console arrived. It is an Aeolian-Skinner console. It just happens to be from Christchurch, Bronxville, just north of New York City, where it was played and famous. But that organ was replaced by a new organ in 2010. This console came available. And another of our great colleagues, Richard Houghton, who was a pioneer in the development and introduction of these solid-state control systems for organs, he took charge of the renovation of this. It's quite an elegant thing. It's one of the last consoles legally to have all ivory hardware. So nothing that you see, well, these buttons are plastic, but everything else that you see is actually ivory, legal ivory. So it served another organ from 1948 until 2008, and I think it arrived here in 2009. How is it different? Well, in many ways, it isn't, because it looks very similar to the original console from 1935. It has knobs are in the same places. The things that couple the keyboards together, these tilting tablets right up here, that's just like what it would have been. What is different is that instead of 2 wire contacts being rubbed together and making contact when you draw something, you're operating reed switches and sensors and I don't even think there are contacts in the buttons. So it's as up to date as it can be. The software of the organ also got an update in this last project because it's just like your phone or your television or my car, which downloads software now over the air every so often. But the guts of it, and certainly how the organist interfaces with the organ, it just doesn't really change. Maybe save for a few details.
This is a great segue for us to start moving the console.
So now, because church has to happen here, they're going to move the console back. And there's probably time for one more. Oh, the rector? Really? No, come on.
Who did did you see somebody? Nope.
Quick one, maybe. So when you're tuning these pipes in your shop, when you bring them here, since it's a different room, do you have to do some fiddling?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can only take things so far in the workshop. The people who built this organ were really good at this because they had a large, what's called a voicing room, in which you have a little organ that can carry one or two sets of pipes on it. And if you're skilled, you have a room that has multiple ones of those so that you can set a pipe from there, and a pipe from there, and a pipe from there, and prejudge their relationship one to the other ahead of getting them here. But there's no substitute for its being here, much like a choir has to adjust its sound if they're going to sing over at the cathedral, or in Durham Cathedral, or back here. You have to adjust the work that you're doing. This organ has, oh Lord, 4,000 and 4,400 pipes in it. So I spent with my colleague Dwayne Prill, a voicer who is also an organist, weeks here, usually from a keyboard out in the room, sometimes from the console in the center of the room. The organ sounds, that part of the organ sounds unbelievably different there than it actually does to you people. It sounds strangely dull and chalky. And that part of the organ is just like raw onion. The richness and fire aren't rich, and it's too much fire. So this is a more challenging room in which to work. So my favorite place was from an electronic keyboard with a MIDI cable out there, because it doesn't really matter how it sounds to the people up here. It matters how it sounds out there. But yes, the pipes absolutely need on-site adjustment for strength, timbre, balance, and then finally that relationship, one stop to another. It's like a recipe. You know, there can be too much cayenne, there can be too much paprika, there can be too many humans.
I'm just saying thanks. I don't know, Jonathan said these gracious things that are true about all of you, all about Calvary, but it's their loss that all these other places didn't realize what a brilliant, lovely, delightful human they had in their midst and didn't become friends. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we're friends at this point in our lives.
Me
so
too.
Grace and peace. Thank you for your
Thank you.
work. And thanks
Thank
for this.
you all.
Thanks, John.